Look, 94% of Americans have no clue where money actually comes from. And I'm not talking about some conspiracy theory here. I'm talking about the cash in your pocket, the numbers you see when you check your bank account online. None of it was printed, none of it was minted. It was literally created out of nowhere with a keyboard and a computer screen. 94% of us, walking around every day, working jobs, paying bills, and we don't understand the most basic thing controlling our entire financial lives. The Federal Reserve really doesn't want us having this conversation, so let me show you exactly what's really happening. You know what's crazy? We've all been fed the same story since we were kids. Some of us even went on those field trips, right? The Bureau of Engraving and Printing. You walk through, you see these massive machines printing fresh bills, and you think, okay, that's where money comes from. That's not where money comes from. That's a show. Here's the key. Physical cash, actual paper bills and coins. That's less than 3% of all the money that exists. 3%. Everything else, it's just numbers on screens. Digital entries. And the way those numbers get created, man, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let me show you something that's going to blow your mind. When you go to a bank and you take out a mortgage, let's say $300,000 to buy a house, what do you think is happening? You probably think the bank is taking money from their vault, money that other people deposited, and they're lending it to you, right? That's what I thought. That's what everyone thinks. But here's what nobody tells you. The second you sign those papers, that bank creates that $300,000. It didn't exist before. They typed it into their system. Boom, new money. They call it fractional reserve banking, which is just a fancy way of making it sound complicated and boring so you won't ask questions. Here's how it actually works. Banks only need to keep a fraction, a tiny percentage of the money they're lending out. But wait, it gets worse. In March 2020, the Federal Reserve dropped that requirement to zero. Zero. That means banks can create as much money as they want through loans. No limits, no reserves required. Does that sound insane to you? Because it should. Here's the key thing you need to understand about the Federal Reserve. It's not federal. And there are no reserves. The whole thing started with a secret meeting in 1913. 10 of the most powerful bankers in the world got together at this place called Jekyll Island. Yeah, that's the actual name. And they designed this system in secret. They wrote up the Federal Reserve Act, and Congress passed it on December 23, when half the representatives had already gone home for Christmas. This wasn't supposed to be discovered. But eventually, people found the records. People started talking. When the government needs money, they don't just print it. The Treasury creates these things called bonds, basically IOUs. Then the Federal Reserve buys those bonds. But here's the thing. The Fed doesn't have that money sitting around. They create it right there, digital entries. They update their ledger, and suddenly there's billions of new dollars. You just got robbed and you didn't even notice. Because every time they do this, every time they create new money, your money becomes worth less. Here's what nobody tells you. They call it inflation, but it's really just theft with a fancy name. Your parents could buy a house for $30,000 back in 1970. That same house today, $400,000. Your dollar has lost 93% of its value since 1913. That's not bad luck. That's not natural economics. That's the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Here's the key that makes everything click. Every dollar they create comes with debt attached to it. Think about this. The Fed creates a dollar, somebody owes that dollar back, plus interest. Okay, but if all money comes into existence as debt, where does the money to pay the interest come from? It doesn't exist yet. So they have to create more money to pay the interest on the old money, which creates more debt, which requires more money creation. It's a hamster wheel. And you're the hamster. They don't want this public. But the Federal Reserve controls everything through one simple lever: interest rates. When they lower rates, borrowing becomes cheaper. More people take out loans. More money gets created out of thin air. The currency inflates. When they raise rates, borrowing becomes expensive. Money creation slows down. The economy contracts. Every recession, every boom, every market crash, they're pulling the strings. And they always see it coming because they're the ones with their hand on the switch. Let me show you what happened when they accidentally told the truth. 2008, everything collapses. Banks are failing. Everyone's panicking. The Federal Reserve solution? They created $3.7 trillion out of thin air. They called it quantitative easing, which again, fancy term to make it sound technical. But then a Fed governor went on TV and said, and I'm not making this up, we simply used the computer to mark up the size of the account. They admitted it on camera. They just type money into existence. Here's what nobody tells you about 2020. The Federal Reserve created more money in 12 months than they created in the previous 100 years combined. 1 year. They expanded the money supply by 40%. Not 4%, 40%. Nearly half of all dollars that exist right now were created in 2020 and 2021. And where did it go? Not to you. Most of it went into buying up financial assets, pumping up stock prices. The rich got exponentially richer while you watched your grocery bill double. This is what they're really doing. And it's not even hidden. It's happening right in front of us. When the Fed prints trillions, people who own assets, stocks, real estate, businesses, they watch their wealth explode because those asset prices go up with all that new money. But if you're working paycheck to paycheck, you just watch everything get more expensive. The wealth gap isn't getting wider by accident. The money creation system is designed to do exactly this. Here's the key mechanism they never explain in school. When a bank creates money through a loan, they only create the principal. They don't create the interest. You borrow $300,000, but over 30 years you pay back $500,000. That extra $200,000 has to come from somewhere else in the economy, from someone else's loan, from more money creation. The whole system requires infinite growth or it collapses. Does that sound sustainable to you? This wasn't supposed to be possible, but in 2009, someone cracked the code. Bitcoin created money that nobody can print more of. The supply is fixed, can't be inflated, can't be manipulated. No central authority can just type more into existence. And the Federal Reserve hates it because Bitcoin threatens the one thing they absolutely must control, the monopoly on money creation. Let me show you exactly why they're so threatened by this. The Fed's power doesn't come from laws or police or military. It comes from being the only game in town. Once people realize money can exist outside their control, the whole thing starts falling apart. That's why every financial institution, every regulatory body, every government agency works overtime to protect the Fed's monopoly. Your confusion isn't a bug, it's a feature. They need you confused. Here's what nobody tells you. They don't teach this in schools because they don't want you to know. Economics classes teach you about supply and demand curves. They teach you theories and models, but they conveniently skip over the actual mechanism of money creation. Why? Because if 94% of Americans understood what I'm telling you right now, they'd lose their minds. So instead, they teach you about budgeting and saving, which are important, but they never explain who's creating the money and why it keeps losing value. This wasn't supposed to happen here. The guys who founded this country knew this danger. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless." Andrew Jackson spent his entire presidency fighting to kill the central bank. He literally said, "You are a den of vipers. I intend to rout you out." They knew. They warned us. We didn't listen. Here's the key to understanding why you feel like you're on a treadmill. You're not failing. The game is rigged. You work 40 hours a week. You save money. And every year, your savings are worth less. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the system is literally designed to siphon off your productivity to the people who control money creation. Every hour you work, they're skimming value off the top through currency debasement, and it's completely legal. Let me show you what changes when you understand this. You stop blaming yourself for struggling financially in a system that's designed to make you struggle. You start making different decisions, not just saving dollars, but protecting actual purchasing power. You start questioning why we accept a system where private banks create public money. You start asking the one question they really don't want you to ask. Does it have to be this way? 94% of Americans don't know any of this. But now you do. So what are you going to do with it? Because here's what nobody tells you. They're counting on you to stay quiet, to stay confused, to stay compliant. The whole system only works if you don't understand it. The Federal Reserve's greatest power isn't creating money. It's keeping you in the dark about how they do it. Not anymore.